Hi, I'm Sarah Cook, a longtime curator of new media art, and I'm joined by Roddy Hunter, a networked performance artist and arts educator. And together we want to tell you about our joint research and invite you to participate in our ISEA workshop this weekend. Over the last 6 decades, networked art practice has evolved in anticipation of and in response to the changing material conditions of communication systems, infrastructures, and technologies. As with other avant-garde art practices associated with the so-called dematerialization of the art object, the material and at times ideological dimensions and properties of these works have challenged existing approaches, methods, and protocols of art conservation. Where museum curators use the word conservation, librarians and archivists talk about preservation when it comes to saving our digital bits. Penny Phelan once observed that, quote, labor to preserve performance is also labor that fundamentally alters it. And with networked art projects, knowing what the edge or the boundary of the work is and where to draw a line around it for its conservation is a substantial challenge.
As a first step, our workshop at ISEA 2020 traces the edges and boundaries of the preservation of both pre-internet and born digital networked art practice, focusing upon artworks which draw on networks of distribution, such as mail art and the internet, as a primary medium of production. We aim to unpack existing digital preservation efforts concerning online and offline exchanges, while also feeling out the present and future implications of the use of machine learning and data mining within preservation strategies and how they affect artistic and curatorial agency and authorship. Networked art's central principle of peer-to-peer distribution as its primary means of co-production and its circumventing of institutional curatorial spaces makes it singularly relevant to our contemporary social, cultural and political experience. As such, networked art, which includes web-based art and internet art, increasingly has become of interest to art institutions. The Art Happens Here NetArt's Archival Poetics exhibition at the New Museum 2018 and the accompanying online portal https://anthology.rhizome.org is one such example. The exhibition takes its title from the work featured here, MTAA's Simple Net Art Diagram 1997, which concisely articulates network art practice as a performative live encounter or exchange taking place within relational space.
The history of networked art practice continues to rely heavily on survey exhibitions, such as the NetArt Anthology and others, to excavate and represent works of art which have been at risk of loss. But the conservation of networked art practices can also benefit from other approaches used across the contemporary art field. This might involve uncovering the networks used by the artist and recording that through interviews, as was the case with conceptual art, or thinking about the work's identifying properties in a material sense, as was the case with other media art forms, or documenting the intent of the artist concerning how the work is instantiated or co-produced in the network, as was the case with performance art. Archival theory around digital preservation offers some further leads, but few efforts bring all of these together. Some of the references to these areas of research are noted here.
Our workshop takes recent works of art as a starting point to scope a range of issues that ought to be taken into account when considering the challenges and opportunities of networked art practice after digital preservation. These include definitions, where and how does networked art happen, resistance to conservation. Many artworks are deliberately difficult to conserve due to their performativity, ephemerality, dissolution, proliferation, or autodestruction. Existing approaches, methods, and protocols. How can libraries and archives and art museum efforts around preventative conservation, record keeping, and archiving be best brought into dialogue to address networked art? The present and future of web preservation. A number of networked art practices are themselves accumulative or built on repositories, again offering a chance to rethink born digital materiality and accessibility. We'll look at each of these in a little more detail here to give you a sense of the kind of conversations we'll have in the workshop.
Does the art always happen in between, as the MTAA diagram suggests? Or if, quote, the address is the art, end quote, as male artists Mark Bloch, Mark Pawson, and others used to stamp, can the location or coordinates of that interaction align with the URL? If our working definition is artworks which draw on networks of distribution as their primary medium of production, what might this mean for works such as Miao Ying's Blind Spot, whose outcome is a Mandarin dictionary annotated to removed censored search terms on Google.China, or a work such as Nastya Sadorenko's 6 Months Without from 2018, where she lived offline, a kind of performance artwork that I recently curated, which will be one of 2 case studies for our workshop.
A number of networked artworks themselves perform acts of digital preservation, such as Mauricien Alari's reproduction of 3D printed replicas of artifacts destroyed by ISIS in her work Material Speculation, ISIS, or Olea Lialina and Dragan Espinshid's 1 terabyte of kilobyte age, which preserves, restores, and appropriates GeoCities websites as ready-made. This arguably contrasts with the pre-Web 2.0 idea that network art is inherently ephemeral or immaterial, and that it deliberately resists collection and conservation. Stuart Brisley, Jeff Cox, and Adrian Ward's The Museum of Ordure from 2001 is thus proposed as our second case study for the workshop, as it challenges digital preservation by setting out to, quote, present the process of digital decay, bit rot, exploring cyberspace as a site where language and imagery disintegrates just as in the physical world, unquote.
If record keeping is creating documentation, archiving is organizing those records, then preservation also involves making them accessible. Different approaches exist from libraries, archives, and museums when it comes to born digital and networked art, such as websites. Different models of practice exist for documentation, as in Joanna Phillips' model for documenting the differences between the score and the manifestations or versions of a work of time-based art, as for enabling access, in the case of archives such as NetArt Anthology. Howard Besser describes preventative conservation as monitoring conditions and infrastructure at micro and macro level, whereas post-custodial archival methodology, first discussed in 1981 by F. Gerald Ham, suggests that archivists can ensure the integrity of, preserve, and provide access to archival materials without taking physical custody over them. Open archival information systems are archives in which networks of people and systems work together to preserve information and keep it accessible. The media art world here at ISEA will be familiar with the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine, and with Rhizome.org's web recorder, which was developed in line with efforts to preserve NetArt featured in the anthology. But what have we learned since, and how accessible is this knowledge to curators and artists at the stage of commissioning or embarking upon the co-production and dissemination of networked art practice? National archives and libraries offer guidance about archiving websites, but this tends to advise reducing them to single root URLs, flattening their content, and advising against any kind of dynamic scripting or interactivity. So how do we change from being led by the affordances of available digital tools to rethinking what networked art practice is in this new age after digital preservation?
The workshop has now been redesigned to take place online for 5 hours in duration, with consideration given for screen breaks. Joined by guest practitioners sharing first-hand insights, participants will have the opportunity to work in groups to develop novel approaches, leading towards a greater understanding of the networked conservation concerns of a diverse range of works. The workshop will interest contemporary artists engaged in curatorial practice, new media and digital art curators and conservators, media art historians and archaeologists. We also hope it will be the first step in a larger research project to network through which artists, curators, researchers, and conservators can investigate ways to co-create new platforms and strategies for networked art practice after digital preservation. Find out more and join in the project at https://networkedart.blog. Thank you very much.